My name is Alec Baines. I have anxiety, and that's okay. Hello everyone, and welcome to the 12th episode of Anxiously Okay. Before I start today's episode, I just want to say that I was attempting to record this episode in a different program, but it did not want to work that well. So we're back on the program I usually use. I won't say, obviously, which one I use or the one that I tried to switch to. But in any case, I am ready to record a brand new episode of the podcast. So today we're going to talk about something that I have talked a little bit about in the past. However, I want to go a bit more in depth today, and that is the idea of the response to anxiety. So 3 very common responses to anxiety are fight, flight, or freeze. And for me, I kind of have experience with all 3, but at different times. I will say that when my anxiety gets really bad, or I just feel pressured, or I feel cornered, people tend to notice that I just shut down. I've mentioned this before where, if there's a lot of peer pressure or a lot of people talking to me at once, I kind of just shut down because I don't know how to handle it all, etc. For example, when I was a kid, I don't remember if I've mentioned this before. When I was a kid, I could memorize calendars, essentially. I could just memorize calendars, so I could tell people when their birthday was. On one hand, it's, kind of neat that I can do that, or I could do that. But then everybody started pressuring me about it. Everybody started asking me questions, and just slowly over time, I just shut down to the point where I just didn't want to say anything or do anything. I kind of just secluded myself, essentially. So the definition of shutdown, at least in my case. So if you go to Merriam-Webster, the definition of a shutdown is the cessation or suspension of an operation or activity. If you go on Google, the definition is a temporary closure due to a malfunction or maintenance. So just keep in mind that suspension and temporary, just keep those words in mind because I'm going to be going back to those a little bit later. So I'm going to explain what shutting down means in terms of my anxiety and also discuss some other responses that seem common, but I don't experience as much, or I experience it in different scenarios. I already gave one example, but in any case, I'm going to talk more in depth about a shutdown. So, what is a shutdown? So, when I shut down, it basically means that I say nothing, I do nothing, and sometimes I might not even think about anything if the anxiety is ramped up too much. Other times, my mind will run rampant, or I will just feel like a failure, which that is partially linked to the fight response. So, I do just want to say real quick that shutdown and freeze, at least the way I'm going to explain this, are very similar. So if you hear me say shut down or freeze, I mean both of them, essentially. You can, at least for the purpose of today's episode, you can use either one interchangeably. So the thing about freezing or shutdown is that freezing actually will prolong the anxiety or whatever emotion it is that you're feeling. Compared to fighting, which is trying to protect yourself from a threat, usually in a negative sense, and flight is avoiding the issue. Now, I've talked about before that I avoid scenarios a lot. The thing about avoiding, and maybe I've mentioned this in the past before, but, avoiding a scenario that can be threatening or will cause anxiety, that can bail us out of scenarios, but that is only a temporary fix. It doesn't do anything to solve the issue at hand, and sometimes that'll actually create new problems. And even sometimes the issue can actually become worse, or the issue, there's no change. It'll be the same issue even if you avoid. So, for example, I don't have too much experience with this personally, however, just to try to keep things simple here. So, as far as avoiding, let's say people invited me to a party. Well, if I want to go to the party, but I also am worried about what people think of me, what my perception is going to be, am I going to embarrass myself, am I going to just be alone the whole time, etc. Well, avoiding it would essentially get rid of those problems temporarily. However, it might also lead to other issues, such as people, reaching out to me saying, hey, why weren't you at the party? Or, like all kinds of stuff like that. For somebody like me, that is very daunting, essentially. But sometimes, even if you avoid a scenario like that, sometimes the person who invited you say, hey, we're having another one next week. So really, you haven't fixed anything. So, that is one example as far as what avoiding can do. It's a temporary situation, or a temporary fix to the situation, but not really going to solve it in the long run. So avoiding, I do a lot, or at least I historically have done that. And then shutting down when I am in a scenario, that's very common as well. If I'm actually in the scenario and I can't avoid, then I kind of resort to a shutdown. Now, I talked about freeze or shutdown. I talked about flight or avoid. But what about the fight response? So for me personally, I know this is different for everybody. My fight response will come out when I'm anxious, but there's no pressure. So if you don't really know what a fight response is, or you don't know how to conceptualize it or put it into words, basically fighting, or at least the fight response, it implies something negative. So something like, getting angry at people, or, feeling suicidal, telling yourself horrible things, or, even feeling sick or nauseous, stuff like that. So for me, trying to fight off anxiety when you don't need to or don't know how to can trigger the fight response. And that can explain my constant nausea growing up, and there's still some of that today. So essentially, instead of being accepting of the anxiety, instead of being accepting of the situation, you're trying to fight it off, or you're trying to, get rid of it, essentially. That is very classic with the fight response. So, why do we respond this way? Can you only have one response? Can you have multiple responses? Well, I think you can have multiple responses, but I also think it depends on the scenario. If you can figure out which response you typically get based on every scenario, or based on the circumstances, I think that will help narrow things down and help you figure out what to do about it. So again, why these responses? So again, I'll go with me personally. So if there's social pressure, or if I'm in a social situation and I don't really know how to handle it, don't know what to say, don't know what to do, my mind will kind of just go blank. It'll resort to doing nothing. And this is different from when I'm not in a scenario, or when I'm not in a situation. If I'm in that scenario and I start to feel anxious, then all of a sudden I notice that I just kind of freeze. Or if there's just pressure, then I kind of notice that I freeze. So if I am anxious and I'm trying to either fight it off, or I'm trying to get it to go away, that can make me, it'll make me feel sick, it'll make me feel worthless, etc. And there's a lot of negativity going on in my mind when that happens. So that would, again, go along with the fight response, is that when I already am anxious and I don't want to be, then the fight response kind of comes out. As far as avoiding, if I know a situation threatens me, or I'm not comfortable with a scenario that could happen, I will avoid it so I don't have to worry about being anxious. And again, that's only a temporary solution. It might bail you out of some anxiety. However, is it actually doing anything to fix the problem? Not really. So, looking back at the definition of shutdown, again, the words temporary and the words suspension. And this is a concept that I feel like a lot more people should do their best to remind themselves of, and myself included. This is something that I need to remind myself of more. When you freeze or when you shut down, it's temporary. It doesn't last forever. We tend to think of this idea as, okay, just hold it out, eventually it'll go away, etc. But if we can try to reframe that thinking, that might help cope with the idea of anxiety. So this is just one example, but instead of thinking or saying, I just have to wait it out, I feel terrible, I'm worthless, etc., if you were to reframe it to something like, I'm not okay right now, but I will be okay later, that might help cope with what you're feeling. So the idea is to focus on what's coming after. I know people try not to say, you try to be present. Don't think about the future. Don't think about the past. I think it's okay to think about either one a little bit, but as long as you're not dwelling in it. The thing is that you cannot feel anxious forever. At least I don't think you can. So, first of all, accepting that maybe you're anxious, maybe you're not feeling too great, maybe you're not really okay. Maybe you're just a little bit on edge. But that is okay. Remind yourself of that, and also remind yourself that if you're kind of in the freeze mode, or even if you're kind of in fight or flight even, just know that it's not going to last forever, and you'll be okay afterwards. You're going to be okay. And I do just want to say this real quick before I move on, is that some people have this idea where, and myself included sometimes, where we tend to think, okay, but it could happen. The worst possible scenario could happen. Okay, it could. And maybe, logically, maybe there is merit in saying, okay, well, I don't know if I'm going to be okay. The idea behind telling yourself that you'll be okay, at least for me, is that if you have already decided you won't be okay later, or that things aren't going to be better, then things won't be. But I think, again, if we can reframe the thinking to where, okay, I know I'm not okay, but that is okay. I know I'm kind of jumping around there a little bit, but again, accepting that maybe you're not okay, but it won't last forever. And I feel like if you can at least do that, then I personally believe that it's a step in the right direction, and it's a step toward feeling better in the long run. Maybe right now, no, maybe not. But in the long run, I feel like it would help more. So in terms of the flight response, so a scenario where you can't handle something, here's my thing about avoiding scenarios. My opinion on this has changed over time. Then again, my opinion on mental health and all this stuff has changed over time, obviously. But if you know that eventually you will be able to handle a scenario, but you need to avoid now, I think avoiding is actually okay. So let me go with a different scenario here. So let's say you want to go on a date or something, or maybe you want to go out and meet somebody. If you have a lot of anxiety concerning the idea of going out and meeting somebody or going out on a date, if you were to take some time for yourself to take care of your mental health or to get therapy or something, I actually feel like that is the perfect reason to avoid. So instead of avoiding all the time, if you were invited to a party or something and you want to go, but you're too anxious to, Again, you're worried about what might happen, etc. Avoid it, but avoid it so that you can focus on your mental health, or so that you can focus on improving yourself. Another strategy for this, if possible, go to a smaller version of that scenario that might be troubling. I know that might be difficult right now. I'm recording this in May of 2021. I know it's been over a year in the COVID-19 pandemic, but then again, maybe you're listening to this and the pandemic is gone. I don't know. But anyways, if you can, go to a smaller version of this scenario. So, for example, instead of going to a party with 100,000 people, I know I'm exaggerating, but with 1,000 people or something, instead of going to a party and just, feeling lost or feeling claustrophobic, chat with a friend, or, meet up with a friend or something, or go out in public and just walk around the store or something, or go walk around the mall. Just get acquainted being around people. Again, if possible. And if that idea is still troubling you, I can't recommend seeing a therapist enough. If you can have access to a therapist, definitely go see a therapist. That's my recommendation. I'm not exaggerating. Going to therapy is one of the things I did to save my life. So, yeah, if possible, if you have the resources to and access to, find a therapist. So, regarding the fight response. We talked about freeze, we talked about flight, but what about fight? So, if you think about how fighting implies something physical, then sometimes doing something physical can kind of help manage it. So, if you're angry or you're telling yourself that you're a failure or something, if you're kind of in that negative space, if you can't, just take a few deep breaths. Or go somewhere away from people temporarily. Basically, physically do something. And do the best you can to remind yourself that even though, again, you're probably not okay right now, but you will be later. Maybe the worst possible scenario will happen right now. Maybe it does. But you're going to be okay after that. You will be later. This is not going to last forever. I want to do an episode on the following topic at some point in the future. I don't know if it'll be the next one. We'll see. But if you meditate or exercise, make sure that you continue to do those, because it is scientifically proven to be helpful when it comes to managing anxiety. Breathing can help with your heart rate in case your heart rate's going crazy, and it also helps with other physical symptoms as well. Again, I'll get into the more specific details in a future episode, because I meditate and sometimes I exercise. I should exercise more, but again, I might cross that bridge sometime later. So, I can say that both exercise and meditation have helped with my anxiety for me personally. And again, I would recommend therapy if possible. And also, I know this is for some reason, this is a very divisive topic, but let me just go ahead and talk about it a bit here. If you need medication to help with your anxiety or the physical symptoms, I would recommend it. I take medication for my anxiety as well, and there's no shame in it. It doesn't make you any less of a person if you have to rely on something that is designed to help you. So, of course, if you can manage your anxiety without medication, okay, great. But if you can't, and you feel like you need to rely on that, and it does help you, then hey, that's what it's designed for. So go for it. That would be my response to that. So, I've talked about all three responses when it comes to anxiety. Maybe your response is different. Maybe you respond with fight when I respond with freeze. You never know. Or at least I'll never know. I don't know. But there is one, if I had to say the golden rule with all three responses, what would I say? Keep in mind that when it comes to any of these responses to your anxiety, it is temporary. You might not be okay, but that is okay. And whenever that response passes, you will be okay when it's done. So, on that note, that will conclude today's episode of Anxiously Okay. Thank you guys for listening. Be sure to check out mentalhealthnewsradio.com, where you can find more than 90 different podcasts all related to different mental health topics. I have a Twitter account at anxiously_OK. I post updates on the podcast, and I have an idea to try to be more active on the account. Turns out you can schedule tweets, so maybe I'll look into that feature a little bit. I have a Twitch account, twitch.tv/smartalec24. I play all kinds of video games there in case you're interested in that. I do just want to say real quick that the week of June 13th, I'm actually going to be gone on vacation. However, let me check my calendar real quick. So today's episode will be out on the 31st. So the one after will be out on the 14th. There will still be an episode on the 14th that comes out. However, again, I'll be on vacation for that, but I pre-record these anyway, so it should be okay. But just wanted to let you guys know I will be on vacation that week. So I do think that being on a vacation will also kind of help myself mentally. I haven't taken a vacation in years, so maybe this will, if this does do anything significant for me, I will be sure to talk about it in a future episode. But okay, that is going to cover today's episode. Thank you guys very much for listening. If you like today's episode, feel free to share it with your friends and family. Again, my podcast is on all kinds of different services. So if you are listening, for example, on Spotify, but somebody else prefers Apple Podcasts or whatever, I should be on there. So just search Anxiously OK, or I think if you search Alec Baines, it might pop up. I have not tested that myself. But in any case, feel free to share the podcast or today's episode with your friends and family. And with that, thank you all for listening, and take care.